This podcast may contain disturbing content for some listeners. It's intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. This is True Crime XS.
So I had an interesting follow-up to an old case. I know we have a continuation of a story, and I don't always like to do that, but it was really interesting. Otherwise, I wouldn't bring it up. So last summer, and we talked about this in one of our episodes, there was a guy that went missing down in North Carolina that just walked into the Croatoan National Forest. Do you remember that? Is a guy named Joshua Clausen.
Did it have to do with Brian Laundrie?
Don't know. I think we talked about it maybe sort of in that realm of things,
Maybe
but no.
his name was Jasua?
Jasua? Like it was missing an H or something?
Well, I just remember you were like, everyone said I was saying it wrong, and I'm not sure it's the same person, so go ahead.
Well, this was a guy, we briefly mentioned him on the episode because he was missing for like 8 days, and then he just walked back out. So this is down like the coast of North Carolina, kind of. And what we did off mic was we started looking to see like where they might find him, but they end up finding him alive. Although he was considered to be dehydrated and malnourished, he just basically walked back out and got a ride. That's not what's interesting. That story was not like, there was not much to it. So we didn't like have a whole episode or anything. It just came up as a blip at the beginning of one of the episodes.
And he was on the coast, not in the mountains.
Yeah, not in the mountains. That was a different dude. That was a whole different situation.
Yeah,
that guy had a weird name. Yes.
I think that my brain is so full of stuff that things that like this one has a complete story. I just tossed it out of my brain.
Yeah, no, I understand that. So this is where this is weird. So I get a notification, same area, that there was this death investigation going on. And the reason I turned on the notifications because someone I knew was going to be down there, and we were talking about different cases in that area. And I added like the name of the towns around it. So there was a death investigation that I got a notification of, I guess, Sunday. Well, on Monday morning, that same guy, Joshua Kenneth Clausen, who went missing in the forest, he was charged with the murder of a man named Daniel Andrew Brisson, who was the death investigation. They found him lying in a road. So he vanished into a national forest for 8 days. And now, not even a year later, he is charged with murder. And like, there's no details on it anywhere. Like, I tried to see if there was going to be a press release, and they finally sent a press release. And it says that he's homeless, that the guy from the forest was homeless. So the press release is about 6 lines long. And I was like, well, that's not super helpful. And it came to me by way of the Miami Herald. I was like, why is the Miami Herald sharing a press release with me from something that happened in North Carolina about this guy from last year? So this guy Clausen has a DWI on the books there. He did not have a driver's license. So it looks like he's charged with driving without a license in addition to the DWI, and a felony probation violation charge. And where this started was a driver in the 100 block of Harris Road in Newport on March the 20th calls 911 and says, there's a dude laying in the road, and I think he's dead. And they identify this guy as Daniel Andrew Brisson, who's also from Newport, and he's 40, whereas the other guy was 20. The 40-year-old, he has some stuff in his criminal record. I started looking him up, but he's a victim, so I didn't want to go too far into that. And then Josh Clausen, who wandered off into a national forest, is charged with killing him. I thought that was very interesting.
Did he hit him with a car? Like,
I
is he
don't.
charged with like first degree murder or like manslaughter?
It's just it looks like an open murder charge.
Vehicular
Yeah, he's being
homicide.
held without bail, but it's an open murder. Like it's not. They haven't specified if it's going to be.
I wonder, it'll be, and you said he was just in the middle of the road.
Yeah, the dead man was in the roadway.
Seems like, that'd be a weird place to dump a body if you didn't hit it with a vehicle, but I guess it's possible.
Well, I was just wondering if that's just where it happened and he just left him there. But they had called off the search for this guy like they knew something. It's one of those cases.
Wait,
Go ahead.
who were they searching for?
This is last year. They stopped searching for that guy, and that was what made it stand out to me because it's unusual that they stopped searching for someone that's missing in a national forest. They searched for him for 4 days, and then they just stopped. And that's why I brought it up to begin with. And it was around the time of the Brian Laundrie stuff that was going on, but it was unrelated. It wasn't related to him at all.
That's so weird. I have some sort of mental block on that, I guess. I can't remember it.
There was this morning, there was another arrest, and I was trying to figure out if it was related to it because I went so when I heard about that on Monday, I got the press release. Tuesday rolled around, and I started sort of looking at it to see if it was going to be a case. It doesn't really look like it is a case for us to follow. He just has a felony open murder right now, so I don't know what happened or anything like that. But what was interesting was a second Clausen showed up on the docket. So now Josh Clausen, he's made his appearance in court in Carteret County down there in North Carolina, and he's got to come back to court on April 6th or April something. But he's being held with no bond.
I was going to say, is he in jail?
Yeah, he's in jail. He's not getting out of jail until they settle up what that murder charge is going to be, and they'll put a bond on him. But if it's a first degree murder, it's going to have like a really high bond. I don't know that a homeless person is going to meet the.
So he was
requirements of the
homeless.
bond. They're saying he was homeless.
Okay, and what about the victim? Was he homeless too?
It didn't say much about him. It just gave
Okay.
his name and his birthday, and I started looking him up.
And you said that the victim was 40 and that the suspect was 20?
Yeah, he's double his age.
Interesting.
But made me mention it to you is it looks like someone with the same last name was charged. What's the day? So
Today's the 23rd.
Yeah, so was charged last night with resisting a public officer and harboring a fugitive. So I'm wondering if there won't be more to the story, like maybe he went to a relative's house and something interesting happened.
I wonder how they knew it was him.
I don't know, but they
Killed the guy.
so I pulled up what they were doing in court when they were holding him without bond, and the only other thing they did in court that stood out to me was the judge ordered a bunch of stuff related to DNA that was beyond the normal search warrant stuff. Typically, they're going to find a reason to search for certain things if you've been arrested. If you've already been arrested, they know something. Most of the time. Most of the time.
I was going to say, I don't know, man. I think sometimes.
Yeah. That's why I said most of the time. But
Yeah.
the judge put in a specific order stating that he was to give up DNA and I think hair samples, and that's not super unusual. But it made me think that it's for comparison purposes to something that's already been collected and documented in some other warrant that's just not released to the public yet. So, not a super interesting piece of true crime news, but I did think it was fascinating that this guy went missing last year and then suddenly he's charged with murder. And
What national forest was he in?
it was Croatan. Croatan. I don't know how you say it. It's Croatan.
And is it between Virginia and North Carolina? Is that
So what do you mean between them?
is it in North Carolina to the north on the coast?
Well, it's in Newport, North Carolina, so it's sort of down by Morehead City, Wilmington, that area. It's a little.
So it's just in the middle of the state as far as north and south.
Yeah, it's in the middle. If you're saying is it closer to Virginia? Not really, but it's also not closer to South Carolina. It is pretty much like
In the middle.
dead
Okay.
center. Yeah.
I was just curious because when you said Newport, I thought that might be Virginia for some reason. I don't know why.
Newport News is in Virginia. That might be what you're thinking of. But Newport, North Carolina is pretty small. This would have been like down where Morehead City is, kind of. So it's not as far south as Wilmington. And it's not as far north
I should
as
just
like
look at a map. Because like none of this stuff makes any sense to me. So okay.
Yeah, it's when you don't live in a place, it's hard to like.
I can't even.
Yeah.
I don't know where, and it doesn't really matter. I was just curious if. So is it possible that they stopped looking for him last year because they felt like they had looked everywhere? I mean, how big is the park?
It's pretty big.
Because I would say, and I don't know specifically about North Carolina, but I would say that there's some places that the reason like nobody disappears in the park is because like you literally can't disappear in the park.
It's 160,000 acres.
I don't know if that's big enough to disappear in.
Oh, I see what you're saying. You feel like if it's kind of open.
Well, if you can walk from one end of the park to the other end of the park, and then, not too far away, there's civilization, it's really hard to like disappear in that park, right? But a lot of the things that we see that involve people disappearing in the wilderness is situations where like that's not the case. Like you can't
I follow.
And so, if I don't know what kind of park this is now, you said 160,000 acres, and that seems huge to me, but I don't know. But it seems like if somebody just goes missing in a park and they've checked everywhere in the park that they could be, then they would just stop looking for them because they clearly left the park. It's when you have like wilderness upon wilderness upon wilderness that, and like there really is no out. So like, and that seems to be more out west in the United States.
Yeah.
I guess there are some areas not out west, but like for the most part, if like you wandered as far as you could wander, and law enforcement or first responders know that if you've wandered as far as you can wander, you're actually farther away from civilization than you were to start with. That's when it becomes worrisome and the search would continue, right? But if he wandered off and he would be close to something, it seems logical they'd stop.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Actually, now that you say it that way, I can see what you're saying. Like,
I just wasn't sure, like, because you brought up that they had stopped looking for him after 4 days, and I have no idea, like, why. But this guy. It sounds like he may have some issues he should deal with.
Oh, I'm sure there's something there that we don't know about yet. Like it'll be something where there'll be like either a mental health factor, or there'll be some kind of anger issue, or there'll be some kind of drug issue, or something.
He may not have realized that everybody thought he was missing.
That's true. That is very true, actually.
You have to keep that in mind when a lot of people jump on missing people, but most of the time you don't report yourself missing.
Yeah. Well, so I'll see. We'll get to see how the murder plays out. And there was somebody mentioned something. It was either in one of the reviews or it was somewhere. They were talking about Cash Gernon. Do you remember this case?
Yes.
It's a Texas case where Darren Brown, it's kind of a weird spelling of Darren's name. So this case was a case that we covered. Was it 2 years ago or a year ago?
It was last year. It happened last May.
Okay, and we were looking at several different angles on that case, and we talked about it. And somebody suggested, like, could there have been some kind of assault by the alleged killer Brown on the little boy Cash, who was a very, very little boy. But I did want to point out, while there's not like a super big update in that case, there is like some news, and that is that last month even though this kid Darren Brown is charged with a capital crime, which means he's eligible for the death penalty and the death of 4-year-old Cash Garnett. When that happens, when a capital crime happens, a lot of additional checks and balances should be put in place in 2022 or 2021, whatever, this time. And one of those is a competency hearing will be required. And so even though Brown's charges were upgraded to capital murder after they found they had him on an open murder charge, and then they found a bunch of evidence that pretty much guaranteed that if Garnett's death wasn't a homicide, it was related to Brown because he had blood on his shoes, he had blood on his clothing, he had blood on his sunglasses, he had blood everywhere. They found Brown to be incompetent to stand trial. So the idea is they will now put him in a facility and try and get him to the point where he can be deemed able to stand trial, competent to stand trial, and able to communicate with his attorneys in order to assist his own defense.
I read a little bit. That case, yeah, you're right. It was like a month ago, I guess. But I think that he's going to end up having an insanity defense.
Yeah, I mean, that seems to be...
And in fact, he may be entitled to one. I mean... Yeah,
that's what I was trying to figure out how to word, yeah.
I feel like it may be warranted here. When we covered the case, so the review was very nice. It posited... the reviewer posited that perhaps Darian Brown had messed with Cash Gernon previously, and he wanted him to... messed with, like, as in, touched him or molested him in some way, and he wanted to keep him from talking, right? And that's why he killed him. And, I have no idea I hadn't even thought about that, really. It's possible, of course. But when we talked about the case, there was no evidence of any sort of sexual assault that had been released. And I still don't know if there was, but according to the person who found the little boy, he was stabbed to death, and he was wearing his pajamas. And it was really weird because a teenager taking well, he was slightly bigger than a toddler, but a small child, and killing them like out of rage or whatever. It's so weird. We talked about how there either somebody was making him do it, or he was insane. I mean...
Well, and, if there had been some kind of element to keep the kid quiet, that would start to make a little more sense for me. But I will say that one of the things I read after we covered that case was that he had attempted to do it to another child, and that showed up in an arrest affidavit. And I don't have all those details sitting in front of me, but I read where there was a 2-year-old girl that she became part of the grand jury side of that. Like, the decision to take that as a capital case came from the idea that he had also tried to do this to another little girl. And there was a lot of pretty convincing testimony that was put into that document. Whether it's real or not, or related or not, I don't know. But yeah, he definitely could have, I could see it going either way, that he was, just out to kill someone, or somebody was sort of coaxing him into it, or he was trying to keep some kid that he had touched inappropriately or abused inappropriately from talking. I could see any of that being accurate information. But,
yeah, I feel like the way that he was killed, though, it doesn't support any of those motives. It's weird. It's really strange to take a baby or a small child out of their bed and stab them to death and leave them on the road to be found. All of that is really weird.
It is.
And I think that it'll probably come out that he has a serious mental defect.
Yeah, I think that would be the case. It's either going to be that, or that's a defense angle that they're working up to see if they can make it.
Both sides, in competency, the defense and the prosecution both get a crack at it as far as bringing in experts. And, to be found incompetent to stand trial at the moment, both sides have to agree. And the prosecution's expert agreed that at this point, Darian Brown he's not competent to stand trial. So, it's a very balanced process. So it can't just be a defense strategy at this point.
Yeah, and there have been other people who have sent in information, not on just these cases, but people had questions about the Ellen Greenberg case and other things. If something comes of that, I will update it. If something comes of this case, meaning Cash Gurnan, I'll update that. And there were some case suggestions that have come along too. I'm not ignoring those, guys. It's just like it's a busy year for everybody, and some of those cases we may cover. There were several really good suggestions that people wanted to hear opinions on, and some people just would like comment on other cases and mention cases and say, "Hey, what about covering this?" All of those have been put in the suggestion pile. I really appreciate people messaging me, and whether I get them off of the social media stuff or if people email us or send in like the little submission forms from our website. I do appreciate that you send the messages, and I also appreciate the people that leave reviews. And it's very helpful for us as we go through this process. This show is run completely by basically a single producer and then like a staff of two. With we have help from people, but it's everything that we do here is very low key. It's a very small operation, which is why I think telling stories like the one that we're getting back to today is important, because not everybody covers these little cases, and I like to be able to do that. And so today I went back to Dallas Magazine, D Magazine, and it's actually from the same person. This is from Glenna Whitley, but the difference is, whereas the other article was from 1993, this article is from 2019, and I love that the same person did a follow-up, because that's super helpful. I don't want to give away the title of the article. I will put a link to all of this at the end. She has a little summary in here. I'm going to use that first. It's not like in the right order as far as the article goes, but here's where we were. We were talking about the murder of Sandy Dial, and we left off when Janet Hawley, who was Sandy Dial's sister, had tracked down a lot of information and given it to Don Anderson, a Texas Ranger, information about D. Ellen Bella and a man named Donnie Dial. So the summary is this. D. Ellen and Sandy Dial, they met when they worked together at a paper company in Richardson, Texas in 1984. Sandy at the time was a sweet, sort of overweight data entry clerk stuck in a bad marriage to a guy named Lynn Dial, who is Don Dial's brother. D. Ellen was an account representative. She was sort of glamorous, fond of nice clothes and jewelry, and she was described by the author of that article as a femme fatale. She was married, and she had confided to Sandy that she had a sugar daddy on the side who would give her money and gifts. Sandy was from a kind of a religious family, and she was sort of fascinated with the role that D. Ellen played. D. Ellen loved talking about men, loved talking about sex, and talking about like this glamorous life. Now, D. Ellen herself, at the age of 14, using a false age, she was one of 5 children of an alcoholic, and she told someone she was 18 when she was 14 in order to marry a musician named Robert Gober. And shortly thereafter, she gave birth to a daughter and then a son, both using the last name Gober. So she gets divorced from Robert in 1984, and she marries a man named Clay Fuller. Clay Fuller adopts her children and ends up with custody of Michelle and Michael Gober. So she also has a lot of affairs, and there is a sugar daddy in there, but it turns out she lied about all the things the sugar daddy had given her. So eventually the sugar daddy broke it off because D. Ellen basically arranged for his wife to find out that D. Ellen and the sugar daddy, a guy named Jerry, were doing it. So in 1986, D. Ellen got fired from the paper company because she falsified a doctor's note to secure an extended paid medical leave. So when she got fired, she got a license to sell insurance. She kept in touch with Sandy Dial, who had worked with her there. And in the spring of 1990, at a party at Sandy's home, D. Ellen meets Sandy's brother-in-law, Don Dial, who was a former police officer who'd been fired from his job. Now, he got fired from his job because he was not attending to someone that he was detaining, who was inebriated to the point of needing assistance, and that person walked into traffic and died. A few months after they met, they pulled this scheme on Ellen's homeowner's insurance company where she tried to get a payout of $315,000, and they end up settling for less than $30,000, so not even 10% of what they were aiming for. So Sandy and D'Ellen weren't spending as much time together because Donnie didn't care for Sandy. Sandy had divorced Don's brother, Lynn Dial, and claimed that he was an abusive husband. And it was not a good split. It was litigious. It was just bad all around. There's this moment where D'Ellen sends Sandy this card and calls her her sister. They get into contact with each other, and D'Ellen pulls a scheme pretending to be Sandy where she takes out a $100,000 MetLife insurance policy on her. So she has to do this crazy shit in order to become the beneficiary, meaning actually as D'Ellen, where she pretends to be Sandy and she files for the policy. And the first time it's rejected because she's trying to make D'Ellen the beneficiary for the insurable interest of the policy. She changes that, refiles it, making the kids, meaning Sandy's children, her two children, they are the ones who are going to get the money if there's a payout. But then she changes it as Sandy. And all the while, Sandy's sister, after she's murdered, has tracked all of this information down. And she realizes that D'Ellen has called Sandy and basically lured her to the scene of her murder. That about sum it up? That about where we were?
I think so.
It's so much going on with this case. The ranger, Don Anderson, he goes to pretty great lengths in sort of a part-time role to use everything. So Don goes to great lengths to put together everything that Janet had put together about Sandy's murder to try and make it usable in court. Now, where we left off, the article was from 1993, so nothing in there really touched on what happened afterwards. D'Ellen had submitted this claim to MetLife. The company filed a lawsuit alleging that the policy was fraudulent, and D'Ellen failed to appear for a civil trial that was ordered about it, and she never collected any money. And in 1993, Glenda, the person who wrote this article, had been talking to Janet about this story, and she couldn't understand, the two of them couldn't understand why D'Ellen's neighborhood had never been canvassed. And the reason was, outside of this article, like just a lack of resources is what happened. So the writer of the article and Janet Hawley, Sandy's sister, they get together and they take flyers that have Sandy's picture and they have pictures of Sandy's car. And Janet takes one side of the street and the writer takes the other side of the street, and they start knocking on doors and talking to people in D'Ellen's neighborhood. Janet knocks on the door of a house which is next door to D'Ellen's, and a woman answers. And after a couple of minutes, Janet waves for the author to come over and join them. And there's a woman there named Patsy Hancock, and she's looking at the flyer that has Sandy's picture on it, and she says, "That's not Sandy Dial." So soon after moving in, Patsy's next door neighbor, who was a woman with short reddish hair, had introduced herself as Sandy Dial. And on the night Sandy disappeared, Patsy had gone out to get her mail and had seen 3 people standing near a door in front of the house next door. Patsy tells Janet that there was a man there that she identifies as Don Dial. He was holding a large comforter in his arms like it was a baby. And it was clearly heavy because he was having to bend his knees to hold it. And there were 2 people rearranging things in the trunk of the car. The next morning, Patsy says she saw Don leave his driveway and come back. And then she sees him washing mud from his 4-wheel drive vehicle. I believe he had like an SUV, like a 4Runner or something. I don't know that for sure. But she sees him back there cleaning it off. When this happens, this is 1993. The article is being written that we were talking about yesterday. And this is sort of a big deal, a really big deal. They take this information, meaning the author and Janet, and they take it over to the Texas Rangers. The story runs in June of 1993, and D'Ellen declines to be interviewed for the story. Also, she declined a request to be interviewed for what we're pulling from in pretty much every story, but we'll get back to her in a minute. D'Ellen had claimed that her children were with her the night of the disappearance. But Michelle and Michael wouldn't confirm this or couldn't confirm this. In September of 1996, Michael commits suicide when he's 20 years old. I just want to put that note here because it does become important with what's happening. The district attorneys for both Hunt County and Dallas County are approached with all of the information that Janet has put together. This includes all the insurance fraud information, all the witnesses they found. And what's weird about it is Hunt County is where Sandy's body was found. Dallas County is where they believe that the murder was committed. That encompasses the houses and what the witnesses saw happening. Since they all declined to pursue indictments, they literally come on board and say there's not enough evidence here for us to get a murder prosecution out of this. But Janet doesn't give up. She goes reading the Texas Code of Criminal Procedure. And we've talked about this before. We've talked about this on the podcast, haven't we?
When we talked about Jeffrey McDonald.
Oh, okay. I thought so. Because I know that. So Meg and I have talked extensively about this over the years.
I think it was a little different with Jeffrey McDonald, but
it was a little different. And I believe that was all federal, which made it even weirder. One of the things that Meg and I have sort of become fascinated with over the years is that certain jurisdictions, state and local, they have allowances in their code of criminal procedure, in their statutes, that allow a private citizen to go before a grand jury to seek an indictment. Now, in some places, it's just that they can go in and they can essentially swear out like up to a misdemeanor charge, or they could try and get a magistrate to swear out a felony charge. Now, this is not a police officer doing this. This is not the result of an investigation. This is a private individual who has a reason to believe that someone has committed a crime. They gather their evidence together and they go before the grand jury and they say, we would like for you to issue a true bill of indictment for this matter on this person involving these criminal charges. That's what typically that role falls to a prosecutor. But in this instance, there's no prosecutor involved because Dallas and Hunt County have declined to be involved in this. So Janet writes to each member of the Hunt County grand jury, and she asked them all for permission to appear to present her case, and they agree. So she goes to her friends and her family and she starts practicing, and she puts together a detailed presentation of all of the evidence. She goes in and the grand jury allows her to present this presentation. And one of the members of the grand jury asks her, what do you do for a living? She tells them she cleans houses. In April of 1996, the Hunt County grand jury issued sealed indictments for conspiracy to commit capital murder against D'Ellen Bella, Don Dial, and Lynn Dial. The way that it goes down, the author describes this and Janet as the murder of Sandy Dial was almost the perfect crime. But D'Ellen's fingerprints on the life insurance forms, the forged signatures, and the witness testimony provided for powerful evidence that convinced two juries. So in 1997, Don was sentenced to 80 years after being convicted of conspiracy to commit murder. And in 1998, D'Ellen was convicted and given a 50-year sentence. The reason that Don's sentence is longer than D'Ellen's is because Don was a former police officer and because he owned a sawed-off shotgun that matched the caliber of the murder weapon. But charges against Lynn Dial were dropped for lack of evidence. So D'Ellen winds up in Gatesville. And in Gatesville, there are 6 prisons. 5 of them are for women. And she began advertising on a prison pal website called Paper Dolls. And she began proclaiming her innocence. So I'm going to skip around here a little bit for a second, because that would seem like, in your opinion, Meg, that would normally be the end of the story, right? She's in prison. That's it.
I mean, yeah, the end of solving Sandy Dial's murder, because even though they were just charged with the conspiracy to commit murder, I would say 50 years for that was justice.
Now I'm going to skip over to the Dallas Morning News for just a second. So I just want to describe who the players are in this. So we have Sandy Dial. She's the victim. Lynn Dial is the father of Sandy's children and her ex-husband. Don Dial is Lynn's brother, the former brother-in-law of Sandy, the uncle to their children, and the ex-boyfriend of D'Ellen Bella. And then we have Miranda Wimberly and Brianna Burkhead. Now, so Miranda's the older daughter, and she is the daughter of Sandy Dial and Lynn Dial. Brianna is the younger daughter of Sandy Dial and Lynn Dial. And then we have Janet Hawley. Now, she's Sandy Dial's younger sister, and she's Miranda and Brianna's aunt. And then we have D'Ellen Bella. Now, she was a friend of Sandy Dial, I guess. Is that how you would say it? I don't know that counts as friendship, but friend is their relationship, I guess, or
I
murderer of.
Frenemy.
Yeah, frenemy. And she's also Don Dial's former girlfriend. This article is from 2012. So we're jumping around a little bit in time to the Dallas Morning News. And this describes how Sandy Harper Dial's murder, more than 20 years later, still divides this family. There's lots of pictures in this article of all the players involved, and this is what the article sort of leads off with. The murder of Sandy Harper Dial irreparably tore a family apart. The conviction almost 6 years later of her former brother-in-law only deepened the divide. A jury sentenced Don Dial to 80 years in prison for conspiring with his girlfriend to kill the Garland woman for insurance money. As Dial comes up from parole the first time next month, old wounds have been ripped open. Janet Hawley is adamant that Dial is guilty. She's rallying support to keep him behind bars. But Brianna Dial Burkhead and Miranda Dial Wimberly, Sandy's daughters and Don's nieces, are convinced that their uncle is innocent, and they are pressing for his release. Since the day Sandy's body was found in her car on a rural road in Hunt County in 1991, Burkhead said, it's been nothing but hurt. For Wimberly, 34 years old, the parole proceedings offer a chance to correct an injustice. The Harper family cries out about their lifetime sentence without my mom, Wimberly wrote to the parole board recently. They have never stopped to think about the lifetime sentence my family has by losing my mom, my Uncle Donnie, and losing them as my family as well. For Sandy's sister, the proceedings are an opportunity to ensure some peace of mind. The only comfort we have is knowing those who violently murdered her in prison, said Hawley in an email to the Dallas Morning News. She's declined to comment any more about this case except through a written statement. The pain that consumes both sides started on December 13th, 1991, and that was the day Sandy told her daughters she planned to see her friend, D'Ellen Bella, who is Don Dial's girlfriend, after her ex-husband Lynn Dial picked the girls up for their weekend visitation. Lynn and Sandy had divorced the week before with an unpleasant split, but her parents got along, says Burkhead, who's now 30. So one of these girls at the time of this article is 30 and the other's 34, so that's 10 years ago. The Dial and Harper families both lived in Garland and had known each other for years through the Pentecostal church that they all attended. The two families were friendly, helping each other with home repairs and babysitting. Lynn Dial and his father-in-law both worked at the Garland Independent School District. The families remained civil after the divorce. The kids remember a birthday party for her mother a few months before her death. When she came to pick us up, we all had cake and ice cream. After the divorce, life seemed to be looking up for Sandy. She was working, raising her daughters, and planning to get married again. The girls were with their father's family after church on December 15th when Sandy's body was found in her car, not far from where Don Dial had once lived. She had been shot in the head. Burkhead's reaction to the news was to be terrified and afraid that whoever did it was going to come after her next. Wimberly said she just felt lost and bewildered, not knowing who would have done such a thing to her mother. Janet didn't know either, but she was determined to find out. According to magazine and newspaper accounts from the time, Holly worked relentlessly to discover who had killed her older sister. And that they go through sort of everything that we were just talking about. Over the next 4 years, Burkhead and Wimberly lived with their father and his second wife. The sisters said they wanted to stay in touch with their mother's family, including their grandparents, but that visits were often difficult. I would want to go to church camp or be involved with something at church, Burkhead said, and I would call my grandparents up and say, hey, can we switch weekends? And it was like, no, you have to come. When they did visit, Burkhead said, Holly constantly asked us, what would you do if your daddy was the one who did it? What if your uncle was involved? Burkhead and Wimberly said they insisted that neither their father nor his brother could have been involved. They did not kill my mother, said Wimberly. After a couple of years, the Dial family went to court to halt the scheduled visitations. Burkhead, now a mother of 3, said she just wanted some flexibility in her teenage schedule, not to end her relationship with the Harpers and her mother's family. No. They were my grandparents. Who wants to lose their grandparents? But the contact with the Harpers all but ended. It's the tragic extension of the murder of Sandy that we had little contact with them. Our families always loved Miranda and Brianna, and we've missed them, said Holly. The already tenuous relationship completely unraveled in 1996 when a grand jury indicted Don Dial and D'Ellen Bella, along with Lynn Dial. Don Dial was tried and found guilty in 1997, and the next year, Bella was convicted and given a long sentence. Charges against Lynn Dial were dropped for lack of evidence in 1998. Wimberly and Burkhead said they never doubted the innocence of their uncle or their father. Still, they've wondered whether they might think differently if they'd been raised by the Harpers. With us being so young, they could have easily convinced us, being around 24/7, said Burkhead. No physical evidence tied Don Dial to the scene, but Noble Walker, who prosecuted him, and Bella, said that it was a very strong circumstantial case. Jurors agreed, taking only 4 hours to return a guilty verdict against the former suburban police officer and 8 hours to find Bella guilty. Holly and her family were absolutely thrilled at the time. You just feel so happy that justice is done. The Dial family, including Wimberly and Burkhead, was devastated. When the verdict was read, Carol Dial Buren, who's Don's sister, said, I looked up at my husband and said, did they convict him? And he said, yes. Of course, I lost it. Before the trial, the worst thing that ever happened to our family was a divorce, and that was bad enough. While the Harpers were joyous about justice being done, Boren said she glanced over and said, Janet, you can be happy, but you've got the wrong person. You need the right killer. Holly acknowledged that she was aware of how the girls felt. We're the bad guys here, she told the news after Bella's trial. The girls don't believe their father did it or their Uncle Donnie did it, but she said, we can't let these people go free just because of that. A few months later, however, prosecutors released Lynn Dial. He didn't comment then, and he hasn't commented since. But Holly remained convinced of his involvement. If I was innocent and accused of killing Sandy Dial, I'm going to be screaming to high heaven that I didn't do it, she told the news in 1998. She predicted then, those girls will know the truth someday. They'll grow up and they'll see it. But the girls are grown now, and they still don't see it. Don Dial is gray and middle-aged now. He shares a cell at the Huntsville unit with a convicted murderer, and he spends his days polishing the brass bars of the state's oldest prison. Unlike many long-term inmates, Dial still has visitors, his siblings, his parents, his children, his grandson, and a host of nieces and nephews, including Burkhead and Wimberly. When Dial first went away, his relatives clung to the hope that the real killer would be caught or that Dial would be freed on appeal. But that hasn't happened. Dial's conviction was upheld in 2000, so parole would be his only hope. He has several factors in his favor. He's a minimum security inmate who avoids trouble whenever possible. His family found him a job, and he can live with his parents. Relatives have written numerous letters on his behalf. I beg that the parole board see how good a man my Uncle Donnie really is and let him out on parole, Wimberly wrote to the board. Dial, who is 57, knows parole officials like to hear inmates express remorse and accept responsibility for their crimes. But he said in an interview last month, there's no way I can say I'm sorry for something that I didn't do. His lack of remorse is distressing, says Holly, and including her nieces in the attempt to free him is an ironic and sensitive tragedy. Dial supporters say they know that parole is hard to come by, but his father says, I'll put it in God's hands, and I believe he'll get home. Don Dial appreciates the efforts on his behalf, but he doesn't want his family to get their hopes up. Parole for first-timers is rare. And when asked to rate his chances, he said, honestly, 0. People just don't make parole. Walker, who is the Hunt County prosecutor, hopes that's the case. He also wrote to the parole board, and he said, the granting of parole would not be commensurate with the amount of suffering this family has endured, nor would it protect society from the legitimate threat posed by inmate Dial. Jurors set punishment at 80 years. Walker noted in an interview, he should do 80 years. Whether or not Dial is paroled, it seems the family rift is unlikely to close anytime soon, if ever. Neither side can get past the crime and the hurt. When the arrest were made in 1996, Holly said, she was glad to be approaching some type of closure. But now, she writes, it seems the sadness will never end. I thought that was a really interesting perspective on this case.
I did too. Did they have any idea who they thought it was?
They never publicized that, which would be sort of, I guess, tricky, legally speaking.
Well, I mean, I guess, but it seems like I really need to hear who they think did it. And it doesn't matter who it is, as long as they don't just say it was some random person, because that we know is not the case. It's an interesting perspective that they don't believe. I assume that they're saying they don't believe Ellen Bella did it either, right?
That doesn't seem to be the case.
That's not what they're saying?
That's not what they're saying. They're not even talking about her. They're specifically, and I've hunted a little bit to see if I can find quotes related to the exact thing you said, but they dance around it.
Well, they were all tried separately. And so basically the reason this, I saw this article, but it was behind a paywall, so I couldn't really read it. It stems from this resentment that Janet Holly ultimately is responsible for their prosecution because she went before the grand jury.
Yeah, there's a lot of resentment between the girls and the aunt that way, but it is expanded out, and it's not just personal, it's the whole family against the whole family.
Right. And so it's so sad to me because I don't know about the role that their father might have played in it. Now, the grand jury indicted him, but ultimately the charges against him were dropped. And so that makes it hard for me to gauge, because my thought was, this is a classic case that the motive was money, basically. And Dee Ellen was collecting the life insurance that she'd set up to receive. And she used Sandy's friendship to get to a payday, essentially. And there was a connection made between the fact that Sandy was about to change the life insurance policy she had through work. She was about to change it so her parents would be the beneficiaries instead of her ex-husband. And that came up as a reason why Lynn was charged as well. And I just never really formed a complete opinion about that. So at the time of the crime, Don and Dee Ellen were dating, but then by the time they went to trial, they weren't. Well,
that was my understanding of it.
They weren't dating because they were both in jail, but I mean, they had broken up. And you don't have any idea if they ever testified against one another, right?
I looked for that. I did not find that in the appeals documents that I was going through. I thought that'd be where I would see it.
I'm not entirely certain that she could have done it by herself. There's no concrete evidence that actually.
There's a good witness.
I was going to say, you know what? She couldn't have done it by herself because of the way the witness to where her car was, mm-hmm. Right? Somebody had to have driven out there, so they knew. At least they and keep in mind, these people weren't charged with murder. They were charged with conspiracy to commit murder. Now, it boggles the mind to think about Dee Ellen and Don Dial, Dee Ellen Bella and Don Dial being in jail for 50 and 80 years. So D'Ellen's sentence is 50 years and Don's is 80 on a conspiracy to commit murder charge. When we've got situations that, I mean, we've talked about recently people who've committed multiple murders who were able to get out to commit other murders, right?
Yeah.
And so these guys got the sentence for just conspiracy to commit murder. I can't iron that out with good logic. Can you?
No, and so this is one of those cases where I basically have gone through a big stack of sort of just continuing proof that they did it with the appeals paper. There's the defense on the other side of this never brings up anything to mitigate it. They never bring up anything to it's all, so you were saying, did they testify against each other? It's not just that they didn't testify against each other. It's that they were both like, we didn't do this.
So my thought on that is like somebody had to help her, right? Because of the way Sandy was not killed
Right.
at the scene. So somebody drove her car out there and then someone was driving a different car.
There is at least a killer and an accessory
And
at that
so
point.
after they broke up, why wouldn't
One turn on the other?
right?
I don't know.
And
So
it seems to me like Don would have been like, if he was innocent. Well, wait though.
So I just wanted to get to, like, you're asking me, like, are you asking me, do I think the sentences are too much?
No.
Because
No, I don't think their sentences are too much. I'm just in all of the fact that being found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, they got more time than some people get for actually murdering someone.
Gotcha. Well, I think there's a little more proof than anybody wants us to believe. So the way that proof sort of plays out is, and you can find this is one of the appeals for D'Ellen Bella. This is from May 3rd, 2000. We don't have a lot of the trial transcripts like in their completeness. What we have is the summaries that they use for appellate court. So when you go to appellate court, you have to present basically everything that you just did with the trial court. So this is the very basic summary and opinion here. D'Ellen Bella is appealing her conviction for conspiracy to commit capital murder. The jury assessed punishment at 50 years confinement. And in 13 issues, the appellant contends generally that 1, the trial court erred in admitting certain evidence. 2, the trial court erred in denying her motion for continuance. 3, the trial court erred in not requiring the state to show the grand jury exercised due diligence. And 4, that the evidence is factually and legally insufficient to support the conviction. So that is how they start their appellate conversation. And it's a summary of everything that we just talked about. What they say here is 3 co-conspirators were tried separately for conspiracy to commit capital murder. And then they include Don Dial as one co-conspirator and his brother Earl Lynn Dial as the other co-conspirator, with the victim being Sandy Dial. The co-conspirators and Sandy had known each other for several years, and Sandy at one time had been married to Lynn. And then they explain it all. But where they are a little different, they go into details with some of the witnesses. Now, for the most part, they're just reciting the facts of the case. They're talking about the different phone calls that are made and the different witnesses that are discovered, and then the discovery of the insurance policies. When they get into the sufficiency of the evidence, they do mention a couple of things. So they specify how a person commits conspiracy to commit murder, like statutorily. And then it says the evidence shows that co-conspirator Don Dial went to the crime scene in Hunt County where Sandy's body was found. Co-conspirator Lynn Dial obtained the death certificates in Hunt County, and the evidence shows that several of the acts comprising the conspiracy occurred in Hunt County, but the evidence they only needed to show that one of the conspirators was there. It didn't need to be all of them. So it further shows that, okay, we know Don talked to the investigators, and we know that Don talked to D'Ellen about it because D'Ellen mentions to Janet Hawley that it looked like some weird sex crime, according to Don, who was present at the scene. Now, it turns out he screwed up his dates and she screwed up when she had that conversation. So that's probably Don covering up for D'Ellen. So does that make him part of the conspiracy? I personally think that it does, but I could see how somebody could say, well, D'Ellen was manipulating Don and she used somebody else to carry out this crime.
I don't think that there's a question of the fact that, according to the Texas Rangers, Don went to the scene. He just was at the scene on Monday.
Right.
And her body wouldn't have been there any longer on Monday. And so the comment that it looked like it was some sort of weird sex act being from Don Dial to D'Ellen Bella to Janet Hawley, it didn't make sense because he wouldn't have seen that at the time that she said it. So she had knowledge of the scene of the crime when, in theory, she shouldn't have had it yet.
Okay.
Do you follow what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The only people who would know...
But I'm saying that didn't necessarily come from Don.
Right, but I do think it was alleged that Don had went to the scene of the crime on Sunday, and the Texas Ranger acknowledged that he went to the crime on Monday. So he was at the scene of the crime.
Correct. He was definitely at the scene of the crime. But my point was that could be D'Ellen asking Don to check it out and using him as an excuse in terms of Janet Hawley.
I'm sure they question him, though, don't you think?
Oh, I'm sure. But there's some kind of lie that occurs with the searching for Sandy's purse,
right? But
that Don is a part of.
He has to be, because he says that Sandy's father asked him to go see if her purse was there, and that was not the case. Sandy's father had not asked him to go and find her purse. And so, if he's not part of the situation, why lie?
I do not know why.
It doesn't help his credibility, is what I'm saying. Because, you could say, well, I just came for no reason at all.
I understand what you're saying there. One of the things that stood out to me, and this is what I really wanted, but I couldn't get. So Anderson, he had two conversations in 1992. One was on the phone in April, I believe it was April 7th. The other was at his office with August 24th. Both of these conversations were with D'Ellen Bella. Whatever is said on those tapes got the defense in a tizzy, and it ends up being a part of this case. Although I don't have the tapes, I don't have the audio, and I don't actually know what the contents of them are. They do show up in court. They show up in the appellate matters. There is something she has said. Either she painted herself into a corner, meaning she lied to him about probably the insurance documents, although the timing of it all, I'm not sure how it would play. But essentially, Anderson had the forethought as a Texas Ranger. He was also Hunt County Sheriff at one point. He had the forethought to record D'Ellen Bella and to paint her into a story. So long before she goes to trial, and long before they have these all of this indictment and all of these other issues in the court, he has started to document what she's saying, just like Janet Hawley had. Janet Hawley was keeping a pretty thorough journal of this time. I will say that one of the interesting things that was brought up is the appellant contended, D'Ellen contended that the trial court erred in failing to require the state to show that the grand jury had exercised due diligence to look for unknown co-conspirators, as alleged in the indictment. And she argued that they didn't show, or her lawyers argued, that they didn't show that due diligence would potentially be used to locate the, quote, Hispanic or dark-skinned men seen approaching a car that looked like Sandy Dial's car. So they do, even to the point of the appeal, they're trying to, it's not like they're saying, oh, but she didn't kill her. They're saying this is not related to us at all. Go over there and find the people that did this, or find the people that were witness, or what part of this. They're saying that Sandy doesn't have anything to do with it. And one of the first, so this is 2000, this document that I'm reading here. And the further along it gets, D'Ellen actually claims actual innocence when she goes to do, so this case basically exhausts its state appeals. And when it starts to move to federal appeals, the first place they start is she wants the court to acknowledge that she's actually innocent. And they don't do that. At one point, did you see the Facebook profile I sent you?
I did.
So at one point, she was like active on social media and proclaiming her innocence, and she was sort of getting her story out there. But
Don't you think somebody was doing that on her behalf?
To get all the information they had in the recordings they had, she has to be participating in that.
Well, the Facebook profile. Well, okay, so yes, I did see the Facebook profile, but like there wasn't much to it.
No. It's been locked down, and all those web links are now defunct.
Did you go on the Wayback Machine?
That is what we are doing for the next episode. Because believe it or not, as crazy as this story is, and as much as we just like sat here and talked about it, this is not even close to the end of what happens with these crazy people. Because it gets so much worse. Where we're going to leave you off here today on this episode is these guys are still in prison. D'Ellen Bella has been eligible for parole since around 2009, and then Don Dial has been eligible for parole since around 2012. I'm stating it outright. She is in prison and he is in prison. But we are coming back with one more part of this story. Whether you believe that there could be any more to this story. Did you think there could be any more to this story when you first started listening to it?
I don't know. This isn't really my type of story, and so I was really open to whatever occurred. I didn't really think about how far it would go, but I guess I was a little shocked.
Yeah, the next part of it, I had trouble believing. And the craziest stuff happens in crimes in Texas, but I had no idea that this woman behind bars could still cause this much crazy. Thank you for joining us. We are sponsored by LabRottiCreations.com. You can check them out at LabRottiCreations.com, and you can still use the code CRIMEXS for a fun pop pet portrait of your own pet. You can also reach us on Twitter, Instagram at TrueCrimeXS, or you can give us a call if you know anything about any of the cases that we're talking about at 252-365-5593. You can also reach us at Gmail at truecrimexs@gmail.com, and you can check out our website at www.truecrimexs.com. We'll see you next time.
This is True Crime XS.
Just to sort of settle it in my mind, is she responsible for the Facebook profile or not? I mean, are inmates allowed to make Facebook profiles?
Yeah, okay, so with D'Ellen Bella, let's look at what we know about her for just 1 second. She's not going to be the type. So inmates can get on email, inmates can get on social media unless they have restrictions in their conviction. That's going to be your people who are sex crime or internet crime.
I think that most of the terms of service and popular social media platforms prohibit anybody that would have to be registered as a sex offender from using their platform, I think.
Correct, but she's not a sex offender.
Right, now I know.
And even what she is accused of that's not necessarily a conviction, she's not I'm talking about the fraud. She's accused of all sorts of fraud. With the insurance company.
But not charged there, right?
Well, she's just okay. So this is a money crime that has a fraud angle to it that they bring up in court. I won't say she's separately charged or convicted, but they wrap it into the conspiracy to commit murder.
Well, right, because they're using that information as motive as to why this was a conspiracy to commit murder.
Right, and so the other insurance company, when she had Don fall off her roof, that insurance company accused her of fraud, but settled the claim anyways.
Okay.
So,
but there's no legal matter there, really.
Correct. I'm just not. I'm not posing it as a conviction, and I'm not really posing it as anything other than she basically would be allowed things. yeah, she's manipulative. She's definitely like doing all sorts of like.
I just immediately assumed that Facebook profile had to have been set up by a family member. But I don't know. I have no idea. So I'll take your word for it if you say that. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how that works. But so I looked, and it was just like a little bit of information about her. And I thought, why on earth is this person on Facebook?
Well, it's all the pictures from like prison. It's got her inmate number. It's like, you can contact me here.
Yeah, it does say, like, really honestly, like, I'm incarcerated here, and she professes her innocence.
Well, she says, I'm currently incarcerated in the state of Texas for a crime I did not commit. Please see my website for the truth in my case. And she lists her website, which is no longer active. And then also, please join the thousands of Texans who are petitioning to abolish the Texas Board of Pardons and Parole. And she lists another website that is also not active. The last thing she posted was 10 years ago.
Right. Yeah. Like, it didn't go. I feel like perhaps the age. Let's see. I think that maybe she was misinformed about how the internet works.
It does sort of read like what my kid calls old people Facebook.
Well, right, because, she's saying like thousands of Texans are, rallying together to abolish the probation and parole board. Like, that's not happening.
Well, not only that, I don't think that's not the internet. I don't think she understands how Texas works.
So don't you do it to me what you wouldn't want somebody to do to you. Follow the golden rule and we won't have no problems. Hey.